I've heard every excuse in the book for this. There are some people who will immediately try to make the argument when I do this that these can't possibly be right-wingers because right-wingers are complex and the left-wingers are... God damn it. Did this actually start recording? Right. They'll say that the left-wingers are inherently anti-authority. This isn't the case. There's been an authoritarian left for quite some time. Just look into Maoism, Stalinism, all of those particular adherents. They're an authoritarian strain of leftism and stuff. So you can't just deflect this and say, boo-hoo, these people had to be left-wingers. It doesn't make any sense to categorize them as the right, because the right-wingers tend to be authoritarians, and these people hated government and stuff, and no. I'm sorry. That doesn't work. It doesn't hold up as a philosophical objection. The fact is that there's an authoritarian left as well. It exists. So no, you're wrong. Your claim that, right off the bat, that this couldn't possibly be right-wingers is debunked. Another thing that I've heard when I make this is that these couldn't possibly be right-wingers because they happen to be anarchist. Well, guess what? There's an anarchist left and there's an anarchist right. If you think that anarchists actually transcend the political spectrum somehow, you really are not educated into the political spectrum at all. All you need to do is to look into libertarian socialism and anarcho-capitalism. There you go. Bam. The left-right spectrum applies to anarchism as well. Boom. Argument down as well. Both of those deflection tactics have been made. Then there was the person in the comment section in this that ultimately came back and said, well, you guys in your liberal areas and your liberal enclaves can't come and point at us and say that we're violent because there's gang violence in the liberal areas. Correlation is not causation, dude. You can't just say that it doesn't... Just because there's gang violence in liberal areas doesn't mean that liberalism causes gang violence. Come on. Now, this is getting really absurd. I'm sorry that I had to shoot down all of those logical fallacies in getting into this video, but the fact of the matter is that I've been on YouTube now for so long that I realized that before I even start with anything else that I say, I have to shoot down all of the potential objections before I even start pointing out what this video is ultimately about, although you can see by the headline what it's about. The fact is that anarcho-capitalists are on the ideological right wing. Libertarian socialists are on the ideological left wing. They're anarchist. Both are. Another thing that I've heard comes from people who believe in syncretic politics and actually believe that somehow because they believe in syncretic politics that they transcend the left-right divide entirely and fall outside the system. Well, unfortunately, when it comes to syncretic politics that merely borrow ideas from both the left and the right and stuff and try to make a syncretic political philosophy out of them and stuff, all you have to do is add up a balance of left and right philosophies and stuff because these aren't a binary. The left-to-right spectrum is just that. It's a spectrum. It's not binary. So people who try to say that third positionists don't fall within that spectrum are bullshit, and they're trying to exploit your sense that this is the same thing as Democrats versus Republicans. It's not. In fact, left-rightism has absolutely nothing to do with the two-party system in this country. Although, to be fair for you, in this country, people who tend to ascribe to left-wing beliefs tend to vote Democratic or even further left, with groups like, oh, I don't know, the Green Party and such. And people who are right tend to vote for the Republican Party, although in reality, by worldwide standards, America really has a center-right party with the Democrats, and then it has a fringe-right party with the Republican Party, who are so far gone and so far out of the mainstream that it's just absolutely absurd. And yet, somehow, because of the fact that this party has a history of legitimacy, it has managed to hold on to power that is completely unwarranted and undeserved. A lot of people are basically de facto Republicans. They will vote Republican just because that's what they've always done. Because they come from a family that happens to have Republicans in it. And that's it. It doesn't really get much deeper than that. This party is subscribing to basically absolutely fringe ideals that are completely out of step with the American people, with their value systems and everything. And yet they get a free pass, essentially because of the fact that they've always been there, and most of the American public is working a job basically from 9 to 5 and is too busy to realize that the party has drifted so far right it's no longer in touch with them individually. Now that that is all out of the way, the fact is that ever since the 9/11 attacks, there have been more attacks by right-wing anti-government extremists that have done things like shot cops, shot Gabrielle Giffords, killed a liberal's cat, scrawled liberal on the cat's head, and such. All of those things have happened than there have been anything from the left. So before you come out here and you get up on your big high horse and say that I'm being hypocritical because there's a left wing, there are left-wing terrorists, what about the Weather Underground, what about all those other groups? I'm including them in this. They haven't killed anyone since 1981. That's just some basic stats for you to educate you, even though you don't want to accept a truth that happens to be an objective truth. And fuck your fucking will and willful ignorance, you fucking assholes. The fact is that the right wing is not being singled out here. The fact is that we're addressing the left wing, because apparently we have to do that before we can even say anything about the right-wingers. Well, guess what? You know, what happened? Whatever happened? What happened to the terrorist left wing and stuff? They faded away. They aren't there anymore. These are imaginary enemies that the right wing keeps around to throw up boogeymans whenever somebody actually criticizes the right wing and says something about it. Well, what about the left wing violence? I mean, you can't just single the right wingers out. There has to be. Yeah, no, sorry, there hasn't been any left wing violent extremism since 1981. We've been gone for a very long time. Just look into it. Whatever happened to the left-wing domestic terrorism? So I'll go over this and stuff so you can finally see all of your stupid fucking points shot down. Since 1981, the right-wing extremists are the only ones who have gone up a body count at all. 60s radicals may grow old, but they never seem to go completely out of style. In a trailer for Robert Redford's recently released film, The Company You Keep, we are informed in 1969, a group of radical anti-war protesters began a campaign of bombing on American soil. Redford plays a former terrorist still in hiding 30 years after the notorious bank robbery that claimed the life of a guard. Never mind that the actual Weathermen didn't go much for bank robberies and avoided killing anyone during their bombing campaign. Several ex-Weathermen were involved in the horrifically bungled Brinks armor car robbery in Rockland County, New York's Nauset Mall, carried out by the remnants of the Black Liberation Party Army, a hyper-violent fragment of the Black Panther Party, and a few ex-members of the Weather Underground. The crime, who left 2 police officers and a security officer dead, the attempted robbery, which ended in the arrest or death of all involved, took place on October 20th, 1981. There have been no deaths linked to American left-wing extremism since, but the specter of left-wing terrorism continues to hold a powerful sway over the American imagination. A policeman in George W. Vigans' novel Outlaws describes a cadre of lefty terrorists as long hairs that got bored with protesting the war and branched out. The description that sums up the general feeling of just about everyone from the Weatherground to the Sudanese Liberation Army. The closest modern-day equivalent is the Earth Liberation Front, whose periodic fire bombings target property and have caused no deaths. The ELF is getting a hip cinematic touch-up in the form of the new indie thriller, The East. We will counterattack three corporations for their worldwide terrorism in the next 6 months, Ellen Page murmurs. As the swirling mountains of images implies that her radical environmentalist cliques tactics will quickly and violently spin out of control. But today there is no equivalent threat from left-wing extremists. Small bands of mass protesters periodically indulge in a bout of window smashing or throw rocks at the police, but bombings, bank robberies, and gunfights with law enforcement are the province of fringe right-wing extremist groups. Unlike the 1960s and the 1970s, there are few true left-wing extremist organizations now operating within the United States. Daryl Johnson notes in the right-wing resurgence how domestic terrorism is being ignored. Johnson is an expert on domestic non-Islamic extremism and a former analyst for the Department of Homeland Security. And although his unit was dismantled in the wake of the conservative outrage over its report on right-wing extremism in the United States, that's right, because that's what right-wingers do. They get pissed off and kill anything that investigates this stuff. So basically it's better to just, to bury it and stop looking into it than root it out. Because we were offended. But fuck you're offended, dude. This country needs safety more than it needs to honor your precious fucking feelings as a conservative. In January 2009, Johnson's team warned of increased cyber attacks, which are attractive options to left-wing extremists who view attacks on economic targets as aligning with their non-violent, no-harm doctrine. It started by the statement that the left-wing terrorist groups were active in the 1970s and early 1980s, and we've seen a shift to more right-wing extremism. Johnson says, "We do not have left-wing extremists who are active. They do occasional property destruction and commit acts of arson. There have been occasional incidences where a police officer will get injured, but the vast majority of these things are property destruction. They just don't have the body count." The crimes listed in the DHS report include disrupted email accounts at laboratories, usually in relation to animal rights, which allegedly cost the target companies of America millions of dollars. Contrast that with the August 24th, 1970 bombing at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Sterling Hall, which contained the Army's Mathematics Research Center, which was barely affected by the attack. But the physics department in the building's lower level was badly hit, wounding several students and a security guard and killing researcher Robert Fashnot. And by the way, when that happened, my father was going to that university. The ultra-left-wing terrorist groups of the 1970s generally carried out such attacks in the protest of bloody U.S. interventions abroad or the entrenched racism of American society. Clearly, their tactics did nothing to hinder either phenomenon, as the invasion of Iraq and racial segregation is still readily apparent in our prison complex, inner cities, and educational systems to illustrate. Considering these continuing evils and the dire threat of climate change and soaring inequality, these are arguably even more issues to be enraged about than there were in the 1970s. But no left-wing radical group has resorted to the kind of murderous plot found in the works of Tom Clancy or Michael Crichton, popular authors who cast environmentalist and anarchist groups as brutal villains. So what has changed since the Brinks Armors car in 1981? A brief moment of left violence in the 1960s and 1970s was a product of the leftists hooking up with anti-colonial international movements, it says Andrew Hartman, an associate professor at Illinois State University. American terrorists thought of themselves as fighting against the colonial power from the belly of the beast in solidarity with these, quote, third world, unquote, movements. It was rooted in an expectation that revolution was right around the corner and that almost any means necessary was appropriate in trying to achieve that. Obviously, this was delusional, but it was a very palpable expectation. America's leftist eager identification with their counterparts in Latin America, Africa, and Asia is readily apparent. The vanguard role of the Vietnamese and other third world countries in defeating U.S. imperialism has been clear to our movement since for some time, reads the 1969 manifesto of the Revolutionary Youth Movement, many of whom's members would join the Weather Underground. This movement will become one division of the International Liberation Army, whose battlefields are added to the many Vietnams that will dismember and dispose of U.S. imperialism. Even the bizarre rhetoric of the SLA reflects this. Every group member, quote, took a, quote, revolutionary name. Patty Hearst's choice was Tiana after the comrade Che Guevara. These were thousands of acts of violent protest happening all over the world, explained ex-weather person Kathy Bloden in a 2001 New Yorker review at the Bed Hills Correctional Facility, where she served a 19-day sentence for her role in a 19-year sentence for her role in the 1981 Brinks robbery. Every day you would hear about acts of violence, so it didn't feel unusual in a certain way. The more exact analogy was probably the violent radical groups in Western Europe who, while just as ineffectual, were far deadlier than their American counterparts. From 1970 to 1981, the Italian Red Brigades killed 3 politicians, 9 magistrates, 65 policemen, and some $300, according to Tony John's post-war A History of Europe since 1945. A former Prime Minister, Aldo Moro, was kidnapped on the day of his greatest political victory, and held hostage at the People's Prison in Rome. His body was found 7 weeks later in the trunk of the car parked in the city center. The Red Army faction robbed 30 banks, took 162 hostages, and killed 28 people, including West Germany's Attorney General. Contrast that with the Weathermen, who only killed each other. On March 6, 1970, a catch of bombs ripped apart the Greenwich Village townhouse, killing 3 Weathermen before they could deploy the bombs at a dance for officers at the Fort Dix, New Jersey. Bill Ayers, who was not present, says in 2001 a 2001 profile of Bolden, who survived the blast. The townhouse knocked us back and forced us to reassess ourselves, pulling us back from that particular abyss. Before the group broke up in 1976, they carried out over 24 bombings across the nations, including attacks on the U.S. Capitol building and the Pentagon, but issued warnings beforehand and avoided killing anyone. No matter their tactics, the leftist terrorists of the 1960s did not inspire much of anything besides a whole lot of novelists and screenwriters. There was no social base for it, no support for it on campus or black communities, says Maurice Eisman, professor of the history of Hamilton College and co-author of America Divided, the Civil War of the 1960s. The appeal of terrorism is that it substitutes the individual or the small band of desperados for a mass social movement. It's hard to organize mass social movements, but it's relatively easy in this country to acquire guns and dynamite. The last point is something the lunatic fringe of the American right has been at pains to prove recently. While left-wing terrorism in the United States is relegated to property damage and Al-Qaeda-inspired militants have largely been foiled in the last decades, right-wing terrorism continues to wreak havoc. From 1997 to 2001, according to the budget for the Center for American Progress, 56% of domestic terrorist attacks can be attributed directly to right-wing extremists, 30% to violent environmentalists, and 12% to Islamic radicals. The most deadly terrorist attack on U.S. soil before 9/11 was carried out by Timothy McVeigh, who was steeped in hard right-wing ideology. As Daryl Dodson testified before the Senate Subcommittee on the Constitution, right-wing extremists have killed 16 police officers and 20 other Americans between 2006 and 2012. That's a higher toll than the murders of all of the American leftist terrorists of the 1970s combined. Many women's health clinics, African-American churches and mosques have been attacked in the same period. Just last week, a man believed to be a member of the white supremacist gang murdered the chief of the Colorado Departments of Corrections at his home. But aside from the movie American History X, right-wing terrorists don't have the same hold on the popular imagination. Maybe corrupted idealism is more interesting than pure hate. As Benjamin Kunkel wrote in a 2005 essay, the terrorist novel has dealt mostly with the gun-happy dregs of the domestic New Left, who for all their snarling commutes killed only a handful of people, and that 20 or 30 years ago. See Philip Roth's American Pastoral. Leftist terrorists play into the American fixation with outlaws, says Max Eblom, author of Revolution in the Air, 60s Radicals Turned to Lenin, Mao, and Xi. There's an archetype of the small band of outlaws who take on authority, and they are part of the American tradition. Now that we have gotten all of that bullshit out of the way, we can talk, fuck the right-wingers who are so fucking pissed off and acting all offended and such. And you know what's going to happen ultimately if this stuff starts going forward? They're going to start trying to suppress the studies, just like the right-wingers always do. Let me tell you something about Republicans and stuff as a party and what they do. Non-partisan study refutes. When a Republican gets challenged and stuff, and a report comes out that's damning to their ideological outlook, what do? They suppress the support. In September, the Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service issued a report that showed cutting tax rates for the wealthiest Americans did not spur economic or job growth. Forbes' Rick Auger tackles the subject in his November 2nd post, and this was 2012, titled Nonpartisan Tax Report Debunks Core Conservative Economic Theory. Therefore, because the study was inconvenient, the GOP rejected the study. and they suppressed it. When we came back and asked them why, they told us that there were methodological flaws. We pushed them further on this, and they said that it contained the words "tax cuts for the rich." Well, I don't know about you, but those are not methodological flaws. What do you do when the Congressional Research Office, the completely nonpartisan arm of the Library of Congress that has been advising Congress and only Congress on matters of policy for nearly a century, produces and research a study that finds absolutely no correlation between the top tax rates and economic growth, thereby destroying a key tenet of conservative economic theory? If you are a Republican member of the United States Senate, you do everything in your power to suppress that report, particularly when it comes less than 2 months before a national election where your candidate is selling this very economic theory as the very basis for his candidacy. Initially released on September 14th, 2012, authored by Thomas Hungerford, who is a specialist in public financing at the CRS, correlated with historical fluctuations in the highest tax rates and tax rates on capital gains dating back to the World War II, with the economic growth or lack of the same that followed. The conclusion: lowering the tax rate on the wealthy and top earners in America do not appear to have any impact at all on economic growth. This paragraph from the report alone says it all. The reduction in the top tax rates appears to be uncorrelated with saving, investment, and productivity growth. The top tax rates appears to have no relation to the size of the economic pie. However, top tax rate reductions appear to be associated with the increasing concentration of income at the top of the income distribution. These three sentences do nothing less than blow apart the central tenet of modern conservative economic theory, confirming that lowering tax rates on the wealthy does absolutely nothing to grow the economy, while doing a great deal to concentrate more wealth in the pockets of those at the very top of the income chain. This issue was addressed in the November 2nd alternate post. Republicans try to hide study that shows that tax cuts for the rich spur inequality, and how Republicans in Congress almost killed a nonpartisan study refuting GOP talking points. Despite Republican efforts to block the findings of the CRS studies, others have shown similar results. Even Republicans have admitted in the past that the Bush tax cuts didn't spur the job and economic growth the party promised. And if nonpartisan studies aren't enough, history makes the same case. Since Republicans began instituting supply-side policies under President Reagan, growth has lagged, income inequality has surged, and the wealthiest Americans make more money while paying less in taxes. Also, a November 1st post the New York Times conveys, Republicans have also tried to discredit the Tax Policy Center ever since the research organization declared that Mitt Romney's proposal to cut tax rates by 20% while protecting the middle class and not increasing the deficit was mathematically impossible. For years, conservatives have pressed the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office to factor in robust economic growth when asked to calculate the cost of tax cuts to the federal budget. Congressional aides and outside economists have said that they were not aware of previous efforts to discredit a study from the research service. When their math doesn't add up, Republicans claim that their vague notion of economic growth will somehow magically make up the difference. And when that is refuted, they're left with nothing more than to lean on charges of bias against nonpartisan experts, said Representative Sander Levin of Michigan, a ranking Democrat at the House Ways and Means Committee. And FYI, most Republicans believe in demonic possession, less than half in climate change, reports the Huffington Post. It cites two polls, one by Public Policy Polling, which shows that 68 of Republican voters believe that it was possible to be possessed by demons, and another Pew Research Center which showed that only 68% of Republicans surveyed said they believed in climate change. As the election looms ever closer, the topic of climate change and global warming has been in the air, with some experts and politicians calling the recent devastation caused by Hurricane Sandy a reality check. However, why 68% of Obama's supporters said they believe that there is solid evidence that the Earth is warming, only 42% of Romney supporters said this was true, according to the Pew survey. In addition, 33% of Romney supporters compared to 5% of Obama supporters said they believe that global warming is, quote, not a problem. Let your head wrap around that. Just absorb it for a minute. 68% of Republican voters believe in demonic possession. 68%. 68%. That is how far gone and completely batshit these people actually are. Most Republicans believe in demonic possession. A new poll released reveals the majority of registered Republican voters believe that demonic possession is a real phenomenon. The Halloween-centric poll conducted by the Public Policy polling showed that 68% of Republicans believe that it's possible to be possessed by demons. Now, when I pull this up, you're going to go, you just went to the Huffington Post. I don't believe in the Huffington Post. The Huffington Post is a biased source. We don't trust the Huffington Post. Well, you know what? All that I had to do to find the study that this came from was to click a link that was on the Huffington Post. Because the left isn't like the right. It loves facts. It backs almost everything it says up with facts, core studies. It references everything it says. It's academic that way, in a way that the right wing will never be. So I just want you to chew on this and tell me that they have values that are reasonable and sensible and are in touch with the American people. Public policy polling said, it comes forward. Raleigh, a new Halloween-centric poll from Public Policy polling finds that 60% of voters have a favorable opinion of Halloween. 26% of Republicans say they'll be dressing up for Halloween this year. More Democrats than Republicans say they'd be donning costumes this year. But among those, was more Republicans, 95% than the Democrats, 80% said they'd decided on their costume at the time they were polled. Chocolate bars were overwhelmingly right, but we can see the results from the study. These are the people that you're looking at on the ideological right. I mean, this is how fucking crazy they are. And yet, they have tried to frame themselves as though they are reasonable people. They are sensible people who believe in sound economic theory. And there's going to be a complete flip out because of this. Hold on. Let me delicately take your eyes to it. DHS, right-wing domestic. So CNN, the DHS, which is now, looking like it's about to come up for being shut down by these people, has apparently decided to issue an intelligent report that warns of right-wing domestic terrorism and stuff. And already you see, Newsbusters, a blog, flipping out, all offended because because CNN is quote-unquote hyping the study. They're not hyping it, dude. It's fucking true. It's absolute truth. It's not hype. It's objective facts. The new intelligence assessment circulated by the Department of Homeland Security. Well, let's see what they say.
Talking about the sovereign citizens, these are people around the country who believe that the federal government and even state government doesn't have any authority over them. There was a case in 2012 in which a father and son were pulled over for a traffic infraction and decided to start shooting again.
Let me close this window down. Let's see what Ken Shepard actually has to say about this. That some federal and local law enforcement groups consider right-wing, quote, sovereign citizens as an equal to, if not greater danger than ISIS-inspired radicals. Yet they do not disclose what groups exactly. Is this the official position of law enforcement entities, or rather politically operative interest groups that say, say, a fraternal order of police? Perez and Boer don't say, although they point to a study from 2 years ago. A survey last year, state and local law enforcement officials listed sovereign citizens terrorists ahead of foreign Islamicists and domestic militant groups as the top domestic terror threat. The survey was part of a study produced by the University of Maryland's National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism. Of course, even here, it must be admitted that such a survey reflects that those officers subjectively feel that they feel right. So the right wing is not exactly happy about being pointed at this way and such, but I need to get at this and stuff. Wing terror. There's reports that are up on the web. I just want you to understand, just what this is and stuff. Perhaps the most unusual thing about the Boston bombing is that it happened at all. While we've seen all manner of domestic terror bomb plots since September 11th, the Times Square bomber, the underwear bomber, even the guy who fantasized about destroying their shared tower, all have been thwarted by the FBI. The perpetrators of bombing or both have, if not the one that have been both subjects. Hold on, I'm looking for something. Why America has been fixated on the threat of Islamic terrorism for more than a decade, all but a few domestic terrorist plots have failed. Between September 11th, 2001 and the end of 2012, there were no successful bomb plots by jihadist terrorists in the United States. Jihadists killed 17 people in the United States in 4 separate incidents during this time, according to the data collected by the journalist Peter Berger and the New America Foundation. All 4 of those incidents involved guns, including the Nidal Hassan shooting rampage at Fort Hood, which killed 13 people. In contrast, right-wing extremists killed 19 people. Killed not 19, but 29 people in those 11 years. 29 people have been killed by them, more of them than by Islamist terrorists. The jihadist record as bomb makers would probably be even worse if not for the FBI, which has reeled in dozens of would-be terrorists with its new confidential informant project. Of the 203 jihadist terrorists cornered by the New America Foundation, just 23 got their hands on explosive materials to make a bomb. More than half of those obtained the components, although often non-functioning, from federal informants or agents as part of a sting. Of the 174 non-jihadists, 51 right-wing terrorists and 5 anarchist terrorists have tried making bombs. Of the 5 right-wing terrorists that the terrorists got their bomb-making supplies, only 5 right-wing terrorists got their bomb-making supplies via sting operations. Using slightly different methodology from Berger, Brian Michael Jenkins of the RAND Corporation also found that, quote, homegrown jihad terror plots have had little success. Most post 9/11 plots, he writes, never got beyond the discussion stage, and most of those that did were stings in which the FBI provided fake bombs. As Mother Jones' examination of cases of more than 500 defendants charged with terrorism-related cases after 9/11 found that 31% of them were nabbed in a sting, while 10% were lured in by an informant who controlled the conspiracy. Perhaps the one reason that the Tsarnaev brothers' alleged plot went as far as it did was that they did not seek out collaborators, avoiding tipping off the FBI, which had already checked out Tamerlane, but decided not to investigate him. The weapons of mass destruction charges filed against Discard Tsarnaev may sound like a big deal. However, the federal weapons of mass destruction statute is sufficiently broad that it has been used against at least 25 defendants since 9/11. Covering all kinds of destructive devices, from grenades and car bombs and underworld bombs on the phone that hijacked on 9/11, the planes hijacked on 9/11, and there have been no Islamist plots involving what we commonly know as weapons of mass destruction, biological, chemical, or nuclear weapons. However, according to the New American Foundation, the only terrorist suspects who have recently obtained biological or chemical weapons such as anthrax and cyanide were right-wing extremists. Holy shit. So let's look at what they were actually saying with this. Oh god. it's fortunately in here. I know that there were some of you that were thinking, no, you can't get at it, you're not going to be able to get at what you're looking for. Homegrown threat. Right and left-wing terrorism since 9/11. The credible but as of yet unconfirmed reports that 3 men directed by Al-Qaeda have a plan for an attack on the United States to concede of the 10th anniversary of September 11th reminds us of the persistence of the threat from the Islamist terrorist. Yet our research indicates that Al-Qaeda and the more motivated by its ideology are not the only sources of terrorism that the country faces, and that more terrorists across the ideological spectrum. There are more terrorists across the ideological spectrum from those motivated by Osama bin Laden's ideology. Yet our research indicates that Al-Qaeda and those motivated by its ideology are not the only sources of terrorism, and that the country faces terrorists across the ideological spectrum, from those motivated by Osama bin Laden's ideology to neo-Nazis, have managed to kill only 30 people in the United States since the attacks on Washington and New York a decade ago. With each of those attacks, of course, a tragedy in order of magnitude smaller than the 15,000 Americans who are murdered every year. Our study also found that Islamist terrorists are no more deadly in the United States than other forms of domestic terror since September 11th. In the aftermath of the 9/11 attack, one of the fears of ordinary citizens and terrorism experts alike was that a new wave of terrorists would strike, some of them armed with chemical, biological, radiological, or even nuclear materials. 10 years later, we have yet to see an Islamist terrorist incident involving such weapons in the United States, and no Islamist militant in this country has made a documented attempt to even acquire such devices. Yet this is not the case for other terrorists, including in the past decade suggest that if a chemical or biological or radiological attack were to take place in the United States, it is more likely that it would not come from an Islamist terrorist, but from a right-wing extremist or anarchist. In partnership with the Syracuse of Maxwell School of Public Policy, the New America Foundation has included the survey of terrorism instances in cases in the United States since September 11th, motivated by political ideologies than other violent Islamicists advocated by bin Laden. Those ideologies span the spectrum from neo-Nazism to militant Christian fundamentalism to anarchism and other violent extremism. In the 111 cases we examined, we found 5 incidences of a successful or development or purchase of biological or chemical or radiological weapons by violent extremists motivated by ideologies that have no relation to Al-Qaeda at all. William Carr, a right-wing militia activist, together with his common-law wife, Judy Brewy, had stored enough chemicals to produce a high quality of hydrogen cyanide gas that could kill thousands, along with more than 100 weapons, including 100,000 rounds of ammunition and more than 100 pounds of explosives. They were arrested in 2003. Carr, who was eventually sentenced to more than 11 years in prison, while Brewery received nearly 5 years. Anarchist and self-proclaimed Dr. Chaos, Joseph Konopola, was stockpiling dangerous chemicals, including sodium cyanide, and was arrested by Chicago police in 2002. He is currently serving a 13-year sentence. Microbiologist Michael Bruce Levin, an FBI investigation concluded, sent waves of panic throughout the country and killed 5 people and sent letters filled with anthrax to politicians and journalists during 2011. Ivins committed suicide in 2008. Some reports have cast doubt on Ivins' responsibility for the attack, but the FBI remains firm in its conclusions that Ivins was responsible, based on the scientific and other evidence. Another white supremacist, James Cummings, managed to acquire a supply of radiological materials from science research companies and may have been planning to build a dirty radiological bomb when his wife killed him after years of domestic abuse in 2008. Yes, that's right. Right-wingers are much more likely to beat their wives as well. To be clear, the 2011 cases of right-wing and left-wing terrorism we examined do not represent a complete survey of non-Islamist terrorist cases in the United States since September 11th. While some of this information is available from the FBI as well as organizations that track right-wing radicalism, such as the Southern Poverty Law Center. Keeping tracks of these incidents is far more difficult than tracking incidences of Islamist terrorism. That is because, unlike Islamist terrorist cases, where nearly all are tried under anti-terrorism law or statutes were dealing with material support to terrorist groups, other domestic terrorism cases are often tried under an array of other statutes, from weapons to explosives violations, property destruction, and arsons to insidious conspiracy, and as in the case of anti-government Harari militia in Michigan. Research on the subject is also hampered by the fact that many of these cases received only limited media attention. Unlike the now 188 cases of Islamist terrorism in the New America Foundation and the Syracuse Maxwell School have found in the United States since September 11th. Yep, widespread circulation on all of that. We sought to impose a clear standard as we coached for politically motivated violence across a broad spectrum of cases, ranging from environmental terrorism to white supremacist terrorism. We were careful to exclude cases in which insanity or mental deficiency may have made a significant impact, such as Jared Lee Lochner, who was accused of killing 6 people and seriously wounding Representative Gabrielle Giffords in January. We also concluded cases of violence that appear to have been premeditated, such as when Jerry Kane and his son, both steeped in anti-government ideology and armed with an assault rifle, killed 2 American Arkansas police during a traffic stop in 2010, before they shot dead themselves in an ensuing car chase. On the other hand, we did include cases in which there were no defined plot, but in which the individuals involved had both extreme political views and brought or constructed high explosives and other offensive weapons. Officials said that in the case of Jeff D. Harbin, a neo-Nazi and border vigilante who was arrested this year in Arizona, he had dozens of with dozen powerful homemade grenades. As in the Islamic terrorism cases in the United States, right and left-wing terrorism were not all young hotheads, but instead on average the age of 36. But unlike the Islamic terrorist case, which involved only 6% females, in other cases of domestic terrorism, women were involved in 15% of the cases. The right and left-wing terrorists in our data set are almost entirely native-born American citizens, and nearly all appear to be Caucasian. But the political motivations behind their acts were diverse in ways that appeared that the participants themselves were not. 37% of the cases involved anti-government extremism, 23% were motivated by environmental or pro-animal rights extremism, and 17% involved white supremacist ideas or biases against a particular ethnic group. And 11% of cases were animated by religious bias or were acts committed on the basis of religious beliefs, including attacks on anti-abortion doctors and providers, like George Tiller. At least 14 people have been killed in right-wing and left-wing terrorism incidents over the past decade. What act inspired Islamic militants' ideas have killed 17 people, 13 of them at Fort Hood, Texas, in 2007. The number of non-Islamic terrorists have caused fatalities was also twice that of Islamic cases. None of this will get reported in the mainstream press. You know why? Because it is not sensationalist enough for them. That's what's so frustrating. And the fact is that there are going to be all kinds of Republicans out there and right-wingers and their psychophants who just basically flip their shit about this. Now, it's true, when you're talking about right-wingers, they tend to be authoritarian. If you've noticed, the Republican Party tends to be one of the parties that supports the militarization of the police force, to be the people that support the military, you know, big on all of that kind of stuff, whereas left-wingers tend to be kind of in favor of animal rights, and that's where it would come from. Or, you know, the rest of us, however, are just people who are supporting the welfare state. I mean, holy shit. That's it. Other shit has happened since then, though. Just to point at it, you know, liberal... This was the operative, a political operative, who a couple of years ago. This is what's happened. I mean, this is what's happening to our our country and stuff. And I want you to understand something and everything about all of this and stuff. Only one side of this country is scared and angry about what's been going on in the political process. That's the right-wingers. They are scared right now. They are terrified. And if you look into it and stuff, you can see what's going on there. They are fucking frightened. And they are lashing out like cornered cats because they know that they're losing power. So, there's going to be a lot of people out there, right off the bat, that are like, no, 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 and doing everything they possibly can to disrupt this and just to downplay this and to avoid anything that could come after these people, you know, that could result in any form of government action on these issues and stuff. And that's what they're going to be doing. And I fully expect this video to get massively downrated, and I expect the right-wing trolls and psychophants to come to it and say all kinds of nasty shit to me and stuff. Here's the thing, your comments won't get approved, and when it comes to your attempts to downrate this video, when I get paid in a few days, I'm going to pay to counteract all of it. Go fuck yourselves. You're not going to kill my SEO ratings and stuff because of the fact that you're pissed off that I called you on your shit and said, fuck your fucking precious feelings. Because that's what happened. Did you know? Did you fucking know that in the Department of Homeland Security and stuff, they shut down the department that was involved with essentially trying to monitor for right-wing domestic terrorism and cases because a bunch of Republican right-wingers were offended that this was going on at the DHS. I don't know what else to tell you, you know, and there's going to be a massive group of people here that are going to start downplaying it and such. Just wait for it.